Shabbat Shalom. Much too quickly, my 3 weeks in Israel has come to an end. A trip that was born in complexity, with many well-intentioned members of this congregation questioning my sanity when I insisted on keeping my El Al tickets and not getting a refund while Iranian ballistic missiles were raining down on the exact place where I planned on bringing my wife and children. That trip was born in complexity. It concluded in complexity as well. What is intellectual complexity? Intellectual complexity means that one can hold on to multiple ideas all at the same time, even sometimes if they stand in stark contradiction with one another. Here are but some examples of intellectual complexity from my trip. Israel was and is at war with Iranian proxies all around it that target Israeli population centers. And yet, I feel much safer letting my kids go out with their friends till all hours of the night unaccompanied in Tel Aviv than I do here in Los Angeles. Spending time in Israel teaches the ability to hold multiple truths at once. The beaches are beautiful, life is delicious, and a war on multiple fronts rage all around you. I drive up with my good friend Jeff Goss to play golf in an idyllic paradise course in Caesarea, all the while listening on the radio to a genocide being perpetrated against the Druze community in southern Syria. We brought our kids to volunteer with IDF soldiers and help them serve food and pack clothes and distribute supplies. And the soldiers bitterly complain about not seeing their families, not certain about their careers when they return, and the subsidies spent by the government to help prop up a disengaged, ultra-Orthodox community that more and more feels not only disengaged with the state of Israel, but disengaged with the Jewish people. We enjoyed our evenings in Herzliya and in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv, and we were unpleasantly awoken by alarms that there were incoming missiles by the Houthis. Construction cranes can be seen everywhere, all over Israel right now, as more and more foreign Jews purchase homes and make Aliyah, Jews moving to Israel, is spiking this summer. And that's all wonderful, all the while global anti-Semitism rages on, and that's all awful. And our trip ended with complexity as the news story of the devastating hunger, starvation in Gaza seemed like it broke in Israel in a fashion we were reading it first in the American news before it arrived at our shores and the debate began all around us. So I'd like to address it today by holding multiple truths all at once. Let's begin by setting the stage. First and foremost, Hamas and many Palestinian collaborators from Gaza initiated this war through a brutal attack on October 7th, the single most catastrophic days for Jews since the end of the Shoah, the Holocaust. Israel's war that it's waging in response against Hamas and all of their collaborators is absolutely just. The war has raged for almost 2 years. Most rational people in Israel believe it's gone on for too long. and wonder how we might sustain this moving forward. But the only reason that it continues on for this period of time is because Hamas refuses to release the hostages or to negotiate in good faith. And it goes without saying that the Hamas-held hostages have been starving for 2 years without a peep from the international community. As I mentioned before, just yesterday, there were released photos of Hamas-held hostages Evyatar David and Ram Bravslavsky that reveal them to be absolutely emaciated after 666 days of being starved in captivity. Rather than Hamas surrender and disarm due to the damage inflicted to the population in Gaza, Hamas welcomes the damage in Gaza as part of its strategy. That incredible damage should be entirely blamed by the global community on Hamas and its agenda, and it's not. At the same time, there are nearly 2 million people living in Gaza in absolute squalor and destruction. There is tremendous food insecurity for the residents of Gaza. That should bother any moral, decent person, even if I believe, and I do, that Israel is just and does not bear the blame for the food insecurity. And I have read, before you get worked up, I have read the same articles as you. Many of you have forwarded them to me. I have read the same op-eds. I have read all of the petitions. And I very much question how many of these very accepted storylines in today's media are actually based on any semblance of fact. In another example of the way in which the schedule of Torah readings always arrives in rhythm with the world, it's this week that we just read that Moses asks, Echa eseh levadi, how shall I bear this work alone? The word Echa appears in the Haftorah. It's the title of the Megillah we're going to read tonight for Tisha B'Av. This is a moment of Echa, a moment of questioning how. How do we know what to believe? Some in the Jewish world look at this humanitarian crisis and ask, how can we have played a role in this level of devastation for so many? Others in our community ask, how can anybody focus on the issue of food insecurity when we're trying to win a war for the entire world and free the hostages not only for our benefit but for all of Western civilization? We are a people meant to ask difficult questions in community, questions of self-reflection. These questions deserve to be asked and they deserve to be discussed in sacred spaces like this one. So let's hold a difficult conversation about what we know versus what I believe. Last week on July 27th, the Free Press published an article written by Mati Friedman titled, Is Gaza Starving? Searching for the Truth in an Information War. Friedman explained that there are no Western reporters reporting now out of Gaza. Not one, not a single one. Therefore, we know that all quote-unquote news that permeates the Western world concerning Gaza is fed to the Western media through 3 categories of reporters. Friedman categorized them as Hamas journalists, Palestinian journalists who identify with Hamas, and Palestinian journalists who live in fear of Hamas. Those 3 sources provide all of the stories that we read day in, day out in our Western media. Because time and again, the Western media chooses to amplify the Hamas news sources over the Israeli news sources because the Hamas stories proved to be more popular. So on July 25th, when the New York Times published a disturbing front-page photo of a Palestinian child in Gaza named Mohammed Zakaria al-Mutawak, who appeared skeletal, that photo should have absolutely disturbed us to our core and forced us to demand to do a serious reckoning, an accounting of our Jewish soul. But then, 2 days later, it became widely known that that Palestinian child did not appear that way because of hunger, but rather because of pre-existing medical conditions. The whole picture was a lie, run on the front page of the New York Times. And to prove that this is a trend, it wasn't a one-time mistake, that these false photos and stories are fed to the media, the Italian paper Il Fatto Quotidiano featured on its front page a gruesome picture of another Palestinian skeletal boy named Osama al-Rakab. That child was revealed to have cystic fibrosis, and Israel actually enabled that child and that family to be airlifted out of Gaza and flown to Italy for medical treatment, assistance in an Italian hospital. So the Italians knew that that photo was a lie when they ran it. The mainstream media should do an accounting of its soul. And that's why moments like this, rooms like this, that were perhaps not intended to be places where news is disseminated, needs to now become transformed into places where truth is spoken in a world where truth does not matter. According to the Jerusalem Post, 55 million people saw the libelous photo of Mutawak, but the correction only reached 90,000. That picture proves that the mainstream media takes what the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry serves and runs the libelous material against Israel without much internal scrutiny whatsoever. Too few morally courageous journalists, such as Bret Stephens, stand alone in their willingness to author truth, such as his recent piece, "No, Israel is not committing genocide in Gaza." On Thursday, there were completely divergent pieces in the New York Times attesting to the hunger crisis and the Wall Street Journal highlighting the lies that are told in the Western world about Israel. There are divergent and even contradictory stories run in Israel's news this week about an end to this war and negotiations with Hamas and whether it's moving along. And I believe that in this moment of complexity, we have to be discerning enough to be able to understand that there might be kernels of truth in each or all of these articles while dismissing the lies in each and all of these articles. This past Thursday morning, I attended a webinar in which Rabbi Erez Sherman of Sinai Temple interviewed Reverend Johnny Moore, who I've had the pleasure of meeting on several occasions here in Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., and in Miami. Reverend Moore is the executive chairman of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, known as the GHF, incubated by the Biden administration and implemented by the Trump administration. The United States and Israel work together in the GHF project that currently feeds approximately 1 million people in Gaza through their 4 distribution sites. So far, the GHF has served 100 million meals in Gaza with higher quality ingredients and higher caloric counts than the UN offerings. Twice I counted during the conversation. Reverend Moore, in a very reflective manner, admitted that the GHF, and I'm going to quote him, is not perfect, far from it. He said, we're learning how to improve every day. Reverend Moore attested to real hunger in Gaza, as it is an active war zone, and that the GHF is trying to combat that hunger each and every day. The GHF receives tremendous criticism on the world stage for not being able to feed everyone in Gaza yet. In the last week or so, the global pressure pushed the Israeli Air Force to begin dropping food everywhere inside of Gaza. Mass food drops everywhere. That's a photo opportunity that makes the world feel a little bit better. But there is no guarantee that any of the food reaches its intended civilians. Why? Because Hamas steals it and resells it at a huge markup to a population that lacks any resources after 2 years of war. And although the New York Times has covered stories that doubt that Hamas conducts that kind of nefarious behavior and engages in this kind of theft, the Jerusalem Post and the American Jewish Committee have issued reports that confirm this exact behavior. The GHF receives minimal assistance and barely any communication from the United Nations, which is still invested in restarting the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, known as UNRWA. The reason why there is such overwhelming hunger in Gaza, but we should not consider it a famine, is because there is food in Gaza right now. Right now as we speak, there are 1,000 UN trucks filled with UN aid, sitting there, rotting, because the UN refuses to participate in this American and Israeli-led effort that sidelines Hamas. The GHF was never designed to be the sole food supply source in Gaza. It was meant to supplement the functioning UN organizations and do its best to help separate food supply chains from Hamas. What the UN calls interception or diversion in their reports, any normal person calls stealing. According to Reverend Moore, approximately 90% of the World Food Program trucks are intercepted by Hamas, with 50% of UNRWA workers having an explicit relationship with Hamas, and others a relationship that every one of us should question. The United States rightfully defunded UNRWA, and the Department of Justice has gone further and disqualified UNRWA from international immunity. This decision has opened UNRWA to be vulnerable to hostage families and others who wish to sue UNRWA in American courts for its participation in the attack and atrocities of October 7th and its planning. So here we are. Intellectual complexity. A significant percentage of the population in Gaza is hungry. The United States and Israel are feeding much of the population as we speak, and feeding more every day. And we find ourselves responsible to feed civilians embedded with the terrorists we're seeking to destroy. This is the first war in history, in which one side of the war is tasked with feeding the population of its enemy it opposes. I want you to imagine for just a brief moment, if the United States had been tasked with feeding Germans while we bombed and attacked Germany. Unfortunately, under these conditions, I'm not certain the United States and the Allied forces could have won World War II. with these expectations set on Israel today. Reverend Moore admitted that there has been chaos at the food distribution centers. There are thousands and thousands of people who try every day to get their food from the food distribution center. And individuals have been shot and killed at the centers and in the surrounding neighborhoods. In some cases, they were shot and killed by American officials. In some cases, they were shot and killed by IDF soldiers. In many, many cases, there were horrific killings perpetrated by Hamas, which has stated that it intends to bring harm to anybody who comes to the GHF sites seeking American or Israeli assistance. Reverend Moore believes that the longer that the GHF functions, it slowly brings about a state in which Hamas is losing control of the Strip. As more and more people are coming to the GHF sites and openly speaking about how much they detest Hamas and the suffering it has brought on its people. You yourselves, don't take my word for it, you yourselves can follow the GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, through its social media updates every day on Twitter, now known as X. Their handle is @GHF Updates, and you can look at real pictures, not intercepted by Hamas and not intercepted by the New York Times. You can look at real pictures that are posted by the GHF of the work that they do every day. It currently has approximately 24,000 followers, and I'm hopeful that more and more of the Jewish community will go there and see what's happening on the ground. It publishes articles and photos about its processes, about its successes and its failures, and tries its best to be as transparent as possible, considering that it operates inside of an active war zone. We must not forget during this conversation, it can't be stated enough, that Hamas is truly an evil, evil organization that benefits from its own people's suffering. Hamas uses the food supply to remain in control of the Gaza population, and their confiscation of aid and capitalization on the black market allows them to pay their fighters to kill IDF soldiers. The assertion of the terror group's power over its population is exactly what the United States and Israel are trying to curtail. Whatever political leaning we find ourselves in, further to my left, further to my right, all along the spectrum, none of us should want Hamas to be strengthened. It certainly doesn't benefit Israel, and it certainly doesn't benefit the Palestinians either. 2 weeks ago, according to many sources, it seemed like a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas was moments away. And then France and England had the very backward idea of threatening Israel with Palestinian statehood in the fall if the war didn't come to an end. The ceasefire talks immediately ended. It unraveled as all of the incentive for Hamas disappeared. Imagine the irony. Imagine. For 2 years, 2 long years, Jews around the world have been called colonizers. And yet the real colonial powers in this world, France and England, who created all of the geographic problems of the map by drawing lines on maps and creating haphazard borders that make no sense throughout the Middle East and Africa, they're the ones that are eager to return with their magic markers to fix everything. Even the Arab bloc, led by the Saudis, have recently taken a different approach with Israel by condemning Hamas, condemning October 7th, and inviting Israel into a regional dialogue. And this invitation hits in a far more appreciated way than the ones by England and France inside of Israel. Further, there is absolutely no evidence of mass killings by the IDF. In different statements, Reverend Moore described the IDF as professional, moral, and responsive. Every time that somebody lies about the IDF, mischaracterizes their behavior, they endanger the lives of the brave men and women who donned the uniform, or who have donned the uniform, or who will don the uniform. This entire war was a choice made by Hamas and all of its Palestinian collaborators. Israel did not want this war. And now, unfortunately, I believe it's incumbent on Israel to win the war. To win the war. Winston Churchill once said concerning war, if you're going through hell, keep going. As a people, we have to dig down and find the strength to keep pushing through this 2-year hell for our own sake. At the same time, we have to be willing to help civilians as best as we possibly can. But the war cannot end. The war cannot end until the 50 hostages are returned. The complex truth is that Israel's dropping more aid. Israel's dropping more aid is moral, and it's right. And at the same time, one could argue that it probably does not reach its intended targets, and it might even prolong the suffering of the entire Strip, because it emboldens Hamas to hang on a day longer, and a day longer, and a day longer. Rather than holding complex ideas, many today, and unfortunately many Jews today, find it far easier to just accept blame, to just find Israel culpable for the entire disaster that is the Gaza Strip today, to blame Israel for the unfolding hunger. It's easy to recognize the benefit of popularity. I could adopt that view. I could walk around with an audacious air of self-righteousness. And I could get invited on the Jon Stewart show and sit with Peter Beinart and disparage our Jewish identity and our people to rousing applause in Manhattan. It's popular to blame Israel. It's always been popular to blame Israel. It always will be popular to blame Israel. It's also extremely dangerous for American Jews to participate in any way in the perpetuation of these lies. On May 21st, Tom Fletcher, the UN humanitarian chief, issued a statement that 14,000 Palestinian babies would die in the next 48 hours. It was a lie. It did not happen. Pro-Palestinian protesters went crazy in the streets everywhere. American Jews defaulted to soul-searching apologies. And that evening, one of those Palestinian protesters approached an event at the Capitol Jewish Museum aimed at bridge building in the Middle East and murdered Sarah Milgram and Yaron Lashinsky. And afterward, he cried out, "Free Palestine!" And in his manifesto, he wrote about the hunger crisis and the impending deaths that were predicted in the Strip. There are real repercussions. There are real repercussions to repeating these lies again and again and again. And I can assure you, because I go and I volunteer with soldiers, I speak with soldiers, I have friends who are in the media in Israel. There's no need for exaggeration, mistruths, propaganda photos, or blood libel. The truth is heart-wrenching enough. I hear from IDF soldiers that return from Gaza that Gaza is a tragic wasteland. It's a tragic wasteland. This is the result of the war that Hamas wanted. And as Jews, and I hope it begins right here, right now in this sanctuary, we have to rise above the hysteria and analyze facts. We have to view the New York Times and traditional media with a far more critical eye. We have to engage in responsible soul-searching and force others to engage in it with us. We must not participate in spreading blood libel against our own homeland. During my family's last morning in Israel on July 26th, Hamas fired missiles from Gaza toward the civilian population of the Israeli town of Kisufim. With all of the destruction and all the food insecurity, Gaza leadership still prefers rocket fire toward Jewish civilians over the supply and protection of its own people. It always has. Hamas must be forced to surrender. It must accept defeat publicly. Hamas cannot be rewarded for punishing its own civilians and feeding lies to the Western media. It's difficult to hold on to all these ideas at once. I can hold on to Israel's war in Gaza against Hamas and all of its collaborators is just. I can hold on to the living situation in Gaza is tragic and awful at once. I can hold on to the fact that if we can help alleviate the pain of the innocent without helping Hamas, we should absolutely do it immediately, at once. I can hold on to the idea that Hamas holds the keys of these tunnel dungeons where the 50 hostages are held, and the decision of whether this war ends is absolutely theirs. I can hold on to the idea, more than anything above all, that Israel and the United States are still the good guys in this conflict. Let's not succumb to any kind of moral inversion in this moment of complexity. In a world where truth no longer matters, let us be the group that demands the ascension of the value of truth again. Let us reestablish the preeminence of facts and sources and do the work that reporters in the media are no longer willing to do. May God give us the strength to hold multiple ideas at once. May God grant us the ability, as Jews, to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to provide for the downtrodden, safeguard the truth, especially at this moment. And may God always bless and protect the state of Israel and the United States of America. And let us say, amen.